Sorry, thanks everybody for bearing with us through our technical difficulties. I just want to introduce, my name is Morgan Turpin, and I'm going to be talking first. We are parents and advocates, and we're each going to give you guys a little picture of our story, as much as we could put into 15 minutes, and then there'll be time for a question and answer at the end. Tom Mortimer is going to go next, and then Tracy Salzar is going to go last. So, I will start, and excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold, so I'm going to try to not cough through this whole entire thing. So, my scientific journey, I'm actually a scientist, started prior to epilepsy entering our lives. After college in early 2009, I began working at a company that's here in Orange County called Ambry Genetics. We're a clinical diagnostic genetics company, and we test for a wide variety of disorders, but back then, our big thing that we tested for was actually cystic fibrosis. I got married that same year that I started working there to my husband, Shayne, and he's also a scientist, so this was our super nerdy wearing goggles at the wedding that we thought was really cool. We had to get a picture of. And I really found a passion for genetics, and I really loved working in the field, so I decided to continue my career. And in 2010, I became a licensed clinical genetics molecular biologist. It's a lot of words, but basically just putting a license to the actual title. And continued working on my career for a couple years, and then in 2012 we celebrated the birth of our first child, Shayne, Alan, and his birth was typical. All of his early milestones were on track. Nothing was super significant in the beginning. And then in November of 2012, he was 7 months to the day, and my husband Shayne was holding him in his lap, and I stood up to take their picture, and I noticed that he was turning blue and he was shaking. And neither of us knew what was going on. My sweet husband, he ran back to our bedroom to grab our What to Expect the First Year book, which I think is super cute and describes how he is. And I got on the phone with 911, and we still didn't really know what was happening, but as I was talking to the dispatcher, I said, I think my son is having a seizure. Neither of us had ever seen a seizure before, so this was a first experience. So they loaded him in the ambulance, they took him to the emergency room, and when we got there, they took his temperature, and he had a temp of 100.7, which for an infant is barely 100.4 is a fever. So he just barely had this little tiny temperature, and they said, it's a febrile seizure, lots of kids have them, it's normal, he'll probably never have another one. And they sent us on our way. And I'll never forget driving home that night and saying to my husband, you know, it's weird, because if he would have a seizure at such a low temperature, don't you think he would have them all the time? ... So actually, let me go back to this before I continue. So this picture was actually taken 3 days later on the day of his second seizure. We were at the Wild Animal Park, we had a great day. He obviously was not sick in between the two seizures, everything was fine. We were visiting my parents, and he had another seizure. So that earned him a hospital admission and a diagnosis of gray area. They said, we don't really know exactly, this is kind of strange that he had two so close together. Again, he had a really tiny little baby temp, and so they started him on Keppra, and that continued down that journey. He did okay for a few weeks, and then in December of 2012, he had 2 seizures in one day. So he actually was at the emergency room earlier in the day. He was at daycare, I was at work, it was horrible, I had to meet them there. He was 8 months old, tiny, awful experience. We went home, and I'm sure many of you know, in the discharge paperwork, one of the things about you need to come back to the hospital is if they have another seizure within 24 hours. So we were barely home 2 hours, and he had another one, and it was like, are you kidding me? What is happening? So he was admitted overnight for a couple of nights at a time, and he had an MRI and probably an EEG, and they diagnosed him with epilepsy. So at least now we kind of had an idea that this was probably going to be a recurring theme. After that day, I decided to take a step back from my career, and I worked from home for a little bit, and then I eventually stopped working because it was pretty evident he was going to require a lot of care. So the seizures persisted. He had one while he was sick about a month later that lasted about 11 minutes, and that was the first more prolonged seizure that he had, and we had to give diastaph for the first time. And so his neurologist at the time decided, these are persisting, we need to add a second medication. So in March of that year, right before he turned 1, he was started on a second medication called trileptal. And after that, everything rapidly went downhill. He was admitted for almost 2 weeks. He kept having seizures, so the response when they continue to have seizures is to keep increasing the medication. And I remember my husband and I were scrambling. We didn't really know that much about epilepsy, and we asked the doctors, we said, is there a chance that this medication is actually making him worse? And they said, that would be very rare. So we said, okay. And he was discharged, and in less than 24 hours, we were on the phone with his neurologist because he was now having another seizure type that he had never had before. He was having myoclonic seizures, which they're small muscle jerks. It's kind of like a hiccup, and he was just clustering them and having them over and over. And the doctor said, you guys got to go back to the emergency room. Like, this is not good. And we got there, and it was such a mess. We didn't take the ambulance, so we were waiting in the waiting room, and he was having seizures, and they were rushing us back and trying to get the IV in, and he had like a 15-minute seizure, and it was a mess. And he ended up getting on the floor, and his oxygen level dropped to 36, which is very, very dangerous. So at that point, the doctor said, he's got to go to the ICU. Like, this is beyond our scope to handle on the floor. And in the meantime, they were trying to get a hold of his neurologist. It was over the weekend, and finally they did, and he said, you've got to stop the second medication, like cold turkey. So within just a few hours, less than 24 hours, he started to return back to himself. And we were like, wow, this is the kid that we know. Something is going in the right direction. And so his doctor came to see us, and it was a hard conversation. He said, I think his care is very complicated, and I think I need to refer you out to somebody that's more of a specialist. So that's when we went to UCLA. And during this time, the owner and CEO of my company that I had worked for, but I wasn't currently working for, messaged me on Facebook. And he said, I've been seeing all the things going on with your son, and he's like, I really think we should do some genetic testing. And at the time, we didn't offer any neurology panels. We hadn't really moved into that space yet. But we did have this new test called whole exome sequencing that looks at all of the coding regions of your DNA. So it's kind of like a broad test, but it would find if there was something to find. And my husband and I were kind of on the fence, because we're like, we don't have any history of any epilepsy on either side of our family. So what's the chance that, we're actually going to find something? And we did. Within 11 days, we got a positive exome result that he has a mutation in the SCN1A gene. So now we had an answer. This gene affects the sodium channel in the body, and one of the interesting things about mutations in this gene is that there's a whole list of contraindicated medications that kids with mutations in this gene should not be on. And on that list was trileptal, which was the med that we felt like was making him worse. So now we had an answer. We weren't crazy. It was actually making him worse. And at least now we can know we can avoid all of those medications in the future. So there's a slide here. It's a spectrum of disorders. It goes from kind of milder febrile seizures all the way to at the severe end is Dravet syndrome. He kind of fell into a place where we weren't really sure. He didn't totally fit the Dravet picture, but he seemed more severe than, because he did have afebrile seizures as well. So they said, let's just call it an SCN1A related seizure disorder. So that's where he was for a bit. And after we kind of had an answer and I went through all this with my former company, they actually invited me to come back to work there for a from-home part-time position. So it was really nice. I was able to do a really flexible work schedule while also still being able to take care of my son. So I did that, and when he was 2, we moved to San Diego County, from Orange County, and we switched neurologists because we wanted somebody that was closer to home, and he was officially diagnosed with Dravet syndrome. So at that point, it was starting to become more evident that he fit the picture of the more severe SCN1A related seizure disorder called Dravet. When he was about 2.5 is when his cognitive delays started to become more apparent. But even then, his seizures were still relatively on the milder end. But then in late 2015, he was about 3.5, the bottom just fell out. Everything just got increasingly worse, and we scrambled. He went from having 1 seizure a month to a couple a week to multiple tonic-clonics every single day, grand mal tonic-clonics. And we felt like we didn't know what we were doing. We were trying medication after medication. We tried the ketogenic diet. We were doing all these things and nothing was helping. He was just getting worse. So in 2016, after a lot of trial and error, I finally said, you know what? I'm done with this. I utilized my contacts at work to get in touch with Dr. Levinsky, who's at NYU. They have a big epilepsy center out there. And there was an upcoming trial for a medication for kids with Dravet. So I got a personal email from one of my colleagues and sent him an email. I was shocked when he answered me right away. And he said, you guys should come out. So we did. In September of 2016, we flew out to New York for 10 days of consultation and appointments. This picture is one of my favorites. Oh yeah, no problem. I'm missing something. And this is one of my favorite pictures. He had a 72-hour ambulatory EEG while we were in the city, and this was in Bryant Park. There was this little children's library, excuse me, that he loved to go to. And so he would just walk around the city with this little EEG hat and his little backpack on, and we would go to this little park in the city, and people would kind of look at him strange and wonder what was going on. We ended up not doing the New York trial after all that, but we did end up doing a different one in San Diego. And this picture is from one of the appointments. He's been in that trial almost 3 years now. And this is his service dog, Bridget, who's his BFF. We obtained her in this process as well. And then in October of 2017, so he had been in kindergarten for a little while, I decided to go back to work. My husband, we decided we needed a dedicated caregiver at home. So my husband actually resigned from his job and he became the full-time at-home caregiver. We kind of switched places. I went back into the office full-time, and it's been really interesting. I found that my personal life and my work life have been extremely interconnected, and it kind of goes both ways. I feel like going through what we've gone through with my son, it gives me a lot of compassion at work. It gives me a lot of drive. It makes me want to try really hard because I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of a genetic diagnosis through my son, and then also conversely in my personal life, having a kid with a complex genetic disorder, I've been able to connect with other families in the Dravet community and help explain what these complicated genetic testing reports, what they mean, or what these variants mean, just breaking it down on a simpler level, because the doctors don't always do a great job at explaining that. It's a lot of information. And then, in addition to working full-time, I decided I wanted to get involved with the community. So in late 2018, I applied to become an ambassador for the Dravet Syndrome Foundation to help other families, to connect them with resources, and just to make them feel less alone. And kind of the 2 pieces of advice that I always give to new families is, number 1, it's okay to ask for a second opinion. I know we struggled with this in the beginning, but it's really, I think our mindset before all of this started was, you know, somebody is sick, you go to the doctor gives you medication, makes it better, and you go home. We didn't have experience with a chronic illness, and what we've learned is you really have to advocate for your child, you have to be their voice, and we do our research, and I go to the doctor and I have all these papers and I say, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And you know, thankfully we have a good doctor who is open to that, and we have a good relationship. That's really important. So if you feel like you don't have that, or you don't like what they're saying, it's okay to seek out somebody else, and coming to an event like this is a really great way to meet other people and make those connections. And then also staying connected to your local epilepsy organizations, coming to things like this, or walks, or support groups, or whatever it may be. I'm guessing if you're here, you're probably already pretty connected. Follow your organizations on social media, sign up for the email newsletters. It's a good way to really stay plugged in with things that are going on. And then I'm going to wrap up pretty quickly, but just wanted to show Shayne is 7.5. He's on 4 daily medications, and he has a vagal nerve stimulator. Unfortunately, he still has daily seizures. They're about 95% are in his sleep, and those have been the hardest to control. He is globally delayed, and he also was diagnosed with autism when he was 5. He's in a moderate to severe special education classroom. He loves school, thankfully. He has his seizure alert dog, Bridget, who's his BFF. He does physical, occupational, and speech therapy, as well as 10 hours of behavioral therapy, ABA, every week. And he also plays softball for our local spirit division for kids with special needs. And then the last thing I wanted to show, we love EADDL. We're super, super grateful for the Levy family, Brad, Candy, Sophie, for making this event. We've come every year since 2013, since it started. And so in 2013, we did not know we had Dravet yet. This was in 2014 when we did. We met up with the Dravet families that we could wrangle. It was very hot that year, and we had to kind of find this little spot in the shade and get a really quick picture, and I think some of them weren't there because it was just so hot. But this was our 2014 representation. This was last year. To me, I think that is really cool to see. An event, sorry, I wasn't going to get emotional, but to see an event like this that can bring together all of these families. We get to meet up every year. It's such a special experience, and just to have us all together in one place and to have our kids get to have the experience of just being kids is something that we are so incredibly thankful for. So thank you for listening to my talk. And now Tom is going to come up next.
How's everybody doing? Good. Well, my name's Tom Mortimer, and this is my son Landon, who's hiding behind me, my wife Emily. We were actually on season 11 of American Ninja Warrior, which is just this past year, and one of the things we were brought out to do is just kind of talk about our story and how we were inspired by a lot of you all, and like a lot of you, we were kind of in the dark with epilepsy. We really didn't know anyone with epilepsy, so this was a huge thing for us, and we've only been doing this just under 2 years, and we're still learning so much, so thank you all just for showing up here, and thank you all for sharing your stories out there and everywhere else. So like I said, I ran in 2015 and 2016, and then again in 2019, but I work at the Tulsa Zoo, so I always kind of had it in. It was like I work with animals, penguins, all these cool birds, and that was my story. And if I'm being really honest with you, I really only wanted to run because Landon had asked me to do it, but then also because I wanted to complete the course. There was no other reason other than that. It was purely selfish, to be honest. Oops, sorry. So anyway, how's that go? Sorry, I'm not tech savvy. So anyway, so who we are, and this is kind of an important thing for me, is my day job. Like I said, I work at the Tulsa Zoo. I coach at a local gym in our town of Owasso, Oklahoma, called Airbenders, and we teach kids how to do ninja warrior-like stuff. I also compete in different leagues. I love running OCR, so if any of you have ever done an obstacle course race, that's my go-to. I love Spartans and all that fun stuff. But more importantly, I'm a dad, I'm a father, I'm a husband, and we're advocates for epilepsy, especially over this last year. Emily actually works at for the Tulsa Regional STEM Alliance, so she does a lot of really cool sciencey stuff. And she's also a triathlete, so she just kind of started doing that in the last year. And she's also an advocate for epilepsy, just like myself. And Landon's really the reason kind of we're doing a lot of this. And we took a kind of a year away from his life. So if any of you are parents, you kind of get the idea that you kind of took a step back from everything you were doing. And we took a year of his life in 2018. We said, we're not going to go to friends' houses. We're not going swimming. We can't go outside alone. No bike rides. We kind of took that away from him. And in that time, he kind of found these other these interests. So he became a magician. You know, he started learning magic. He watched this America's Got Talent, the Colin Clouds, and Shin Lim, right? And he started learning magic, and he started writing, so he became an author in his own ways. And he's always been kind of a cat expert. You have a cat, and he'll ask you what type it is. And so he became all these things. And so it wasn't that we lost a year, but we really did kind of take a year back from just life in general. So kind of our story is, and just kind of to do it shortly, is in January we were diagnosed, we had our first seizure. Same thing, we had a high temperature, the 104, 105 range. We didn't go to the hospital, we called and talked to them, but we were worried about going in and, you know, actually getting the flu during that time of the year. We didn't, he was still drinking water. He was lethargic, but he was still okay, he was coherent, everything was all right. And eventually he got through it. We went back to the doctor, they said he's fine. Sent him back to school. And Landon actually had his first seizure at school. And like many of you, I can actually remember where I was and how long it took me to get to the school after we were contacted that he had a seizure. And Landon has the tonic-clonics, the grand mals. Again, like many of you, we were misdiagnosed that first year. We were told that, or that first month, they said he had an overactive amygdala. So that's the fight or flight response of your body. And so we started therapy. And the therapy wasn't helping, he was still having seizures. And so then they told us he has grand mal seizures, partial complex. So we went with that for a year and through December. And then eventually they told us, hey, your son actually has generalized epilepsy with absence and tonic-clonic seizures. And that really did help us. Once we got the diagnosis, we were able to move forward because it allowed us to get on the right medication. Because up to that point, we had been miserable on the ketogenic diet. We had tried CBD oil. And I do think these things work for certain individuals, but they weren't working for us. Like I said, in December, we actually got some relief, and that was going to the KC Mercy Hospital. In our town of Tulsa, Oklahoma, we only had 2 children's neurologists. And if I'm being honest with you, none of them really know much about epilepsy. It's throwing Keppra at everything, and they only increase the dosage. So seeing the Children's Mercy Hospital really helped us and allowed us to move forward. And then a lot of you know that, especially with tonic-clonics, anyone that has that seizure, has a reboot phase. So Landon would be out anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour easily. And we did lose a lot of time in that sense. But something that we learned during this time was it was okay not to be okay. And that took us a long time to get there. We went through all the denial, the processes of grief, right? We were in denial, we were in isolation, anger, bargaining, depression. And finally we accepted, not that this was okay, but this was what we were going to deal with and we were going to move forward with it. So, sorry, I got my notes here, I'm not very good about it. So anyway, so during this time, right about this time, we started looking at Ninja Warrior. My application was due for Ninja Warrior in December, and I was going to go off the notion that I had done, I worked at the zoo. We kept epilepsy kind of quiet, so only our close friends and family really knew what was going on. And we decided about that time that we would, maybe we'd tell our story. We wouldn't keep it a secret from anyone else. And so we had talked to Landon, and my wife and I had talked, and probably about 2 weeks prior to this application being due, we trashed it. And we started over, and Landon and I put some video together, we talked about epilepsy, we shared some of his seizures that he was having, because at that time, Even before Landon had seizures, the only seizure I knew was if you fell over and you started convulsing, and that's all I knew what a seizure was. So we thought there would be some education level there. American Ninja Warrior was pretty amazing because what they did is they then took that story and they found a positive way to explain that, and they did a beautiful job with it.
So as we found out, we had no idea really what we were in for with seizures. So we kind of imagined how many other people are out there that don't really know this, and how many people are in our own community that know and love Landon, but yet if he was to have a seizure in front of them, they would have no idea how to help and take care of him. So we really wanted to try to frame this message in a way that is very uplifting and positive, and really is not frightening, because I know the kids, the first time they saw Landon have a seizure at school, they were terrified. They were really scared for his health and well-being. So we wanted to kind of take away some of that frightening stigma with it and just open up the conversation, the dialogue. So with penguins, Tom's taking care of a number of penguins, which sounds super cute and wonderful to have a baby penguin in your home, and it really is the first time you do it. But then after that, it's like, oh yay, more fish milkshakes. Does it smell good at 5 in the morning? So we decided to kind of go with the penguins because that's something very near and dear to our family. But then also with the ninja thing, so we decorated the penguin up as a ninja, and then the penguin will always have the epilepsy ribbon on his foot because he's kicking epilepsies. So that's really kind of our message that we wanted to instill. That's kind of where the penguin came from on our shirts and on the stickers that we're giving out and everything that we are doing. So a little bit about what really happened is American Ninja Warrior is actually filmed at night. So it was a shock to us the first time he was on it. So we walk in and we're like, why are we checking in at 7 p.m.? Well, it turns out you check in at 7 p.m. because they run from sundown to sun up for filming. So his first year, he actually filmed at about 3 a.m. Thankfully, that didn't happen this last year because they knew Landon needed to have sleep, and that was very important, so they allowed us to go early. But we kind of had an idea of what to expect with American Ninja Warrior. They allow you to have so many tickets because it's a show. They want a spectacle. They want you to be up there cheering. It's all very, very positive and uplifting atmosphere, which we love. So we created the shirts with the penguin, and we kind of just threw them out there, like asking people, like, hey, would you like a penguin shirt? And the response was incredible. We probably sold, over 200 shirts? And so we just sold them at cost at that point, because we were just trying to get people who wanted to come on the show with us. So our guest list kept growing. So it was way past 10 tickets. So we would call up the producer and say, can we have a few more tickets, please? And then a week later, can we have a few more tickets, please? Until it got to be about 50 tickets. So we probably had one of the biggest groups. And so we walk in there with our purple penguin shirts, and they knew who we were as soon as we walked up to the gate, which was pretty amazing. And they welcomed us with open arms. They were always so wonderful to everybody, and appreciative of all the kids, and really responsive to all of the kids, and very responsive to Landon's needs.
Yeah, so one of the really cool things, right before you go up and run on the stage, the producers look at you and they say, what are you going to do? And I don't flip or do anything, but the people ahead of me are like, I'm going to do a backflip. I'm like, oh, and I'm freaking out because I'm like, I cannot do a flip. And people are taking props up there, so they have there's a dentist, so he's got all these dental tools, right? He's going out there. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I don't have any dental tools either. So by the time they got to me, they said, what are you going to do? And I really didn't know what I was going to do. It wasn't about me, it wasn't about, Emily, it was about Landon, it was about your families too, and we wanted to represent epilepsy 100%. So it's exactly why the message on the back is Epilepsy Warriors. It's not about one person, it's about all of us, right? 1 in 26, that number's important, and we figured people would look that up. I bet Google was just, hot that night with 1 in 26, and that's what we wanted. So I told them I was just going to turn around and just get a close-up of the shirt, and that's all that mattered. And obviously this is what they came up with, and it was perfect. And it really represented what we were there for. It was a we thing, it was you all, it was all of us, not just one person. So after filming that night, one of the sweetest things happened. Our producer that was working with us from LA called up and he said, hey, will you come back out the next day and test some of the obstacles? I had fallen a little bit short that night, so I wasn't going to move on to the next night. And that allowed me to go back and test out some of the obstacles I hadn't been on. But the greatest thing is they really, with Landon, they really took to him. So our producer went in the back, he found his Pokemon hat, Pokemon cards, and they really catered to us out there, and they really didn't have to. And it was just the sweetest thing, and you could tell that they were learning a lot through the process too, and they were doing their homework to know what we needed and what he needed during that time.
one thing we kind of thought was with the last couple of seasons of American Ninja Warrior, which everyone in our community knew us, was like, that's super cool, that's super awesome, okay, got filmed, we're done. Well, we kind of expected maybe that to happen. We didn't have any idea what was in store. So we just went back to life, as normal. And then June hits, and we're leading up to the time when American Ninja Warrior gets ready to air. And they actually had to delay the airing of the episode because of the Stanley Cup, which we're from Oklahoma, Missouri, so yay, go Blues. But, so we started getting these calls from local media outlets, from newspapers, from our own hometown newspaper in Owasso to the Tulsa newspaper to different news channels, all wanting to do stories on epilepsy on American Ninja Warrior. Okay, this is pretty cool. And then, all of a sudden, Father's Day, which was the Sunday before the show aired. We're actually not on social media that much, or at least we weren't until after all this. And all of a sudden, somebody just sent me a post saying, hey, check out Twitter. So I checked it out, and I see this. And I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be tough. So I opened it up, and they actually aired part of his story with a message like that. So just showing the love between Tom and Landon was just unbelievable. And then I'm really thankful that they allowed us to kind of preview it before we were in front of everyone else that we know and love, watching it live, because there were some tears that shed. But it was just really amazing, the outpouring of love and support and how seriously they took this cause. I mean, American Ninja Warrior, it's a national TV show. I mean, they can broadcast whatever they want. When they came to film at our house, they stayed with us for 12 hours filming. And this is the 3 minutes of those 12 hours they chose to put together. They chose to make sure that the message was put together to show the severity, the seriousness, and also the love and the community that is involved in this. I think that's something we really appreciate American Ninja Warrior doing, to helping to promote the advocacy for this.
Yeah, so like Emily said, we had a watch party later at that time, and we were really selfish. We kept epilepsy to ourselves, like I said. We didn't want anyone knowing about it. We're very introverted people. I've said this before, but we're in bed at 8:30, we're up at like 4:30. That's our lives. We don't go out, we don't do anything. And well, probably a lot of people are the same way. You kind of keep it to yourself. And we realized after it kind of got out that there's so many people wanting to share their stories. People wanted to talk, people wanted to support. And what we realized then was that we had these hundreds and thousands of friends now and family that wanted to help somehow. They wanted to donate, they wanted to learn, they wanted to advocate in their own way, whether it was just wearing a shirt and saying, hey, epilepsy is a real thing. And so many of our friends and family came out for this event, and the zoo hosted it for us, which was really sweet. And they got to watch and cry along with us because we'd already seen it 100 times, so we were all in there together. But again, the support, and you can see just the kids and the adults wearing the shirts, it was such a big thing for us. And then the really amazing thing that happened through this that I wasn't prepared for, and I don't think we were prepared for as a family, is it really took on its own message from there. We got a lot of feedback from people through social media. We weren't really on social media a lot, but we realized we needed Instagram accounts. We needed to make sure we're on Facebook and Twitter. And these are the stories from a lot of the people, just some of the stories. And they would either just tell us how much it inspired them, or they would tell their own stories about their own losses, or their own fights, or they were trying to reach out to help us. The ninja community was great, but the epilepsy community was even better. And that was something that I remember reading some stories late one night and telling Emily that I don't know that I can do this anymore. And just hearing your stories was breaking my heart. And it was you don't feel like you're strong enough to hear your own story, but then you hear others and you realize you're pretty lucky to be where you're at. And so moving forward, it was something that we were going to do and we wanted to be a part of, and it worked out really well in that sense. So the one nice thing is that the penguin shirts just took off from there. We had kids at races that were putting them on and wearing them. We had friends and family and coworkers. The girl with the dog actually had seizures at a younger age, and she just recently passed away sadly, but she wanted a shirt, she wanted a bracelet to show that she wanted to end up with epilepsy too. That's her service dog. Friends that went out to Disneyland, or Disney World, to celebrate. Friends that were out of the country. Friends that were running races for epilepsy. So it was just all over the place. UNAA is a ninja competition that a lot of people do, and this is one of the kids I coached. Him and his dad wore their shirts out there to compete in. This girl is a personal trainer. She wears her shirt with her, when she's doing her training. So it really just kind of took its own thing, and then we thought there were so many people asking for t-shirts that maybe we could start Bonfire makes these t-shirts and we could donate the money to our epilepsy chapter in Oklahoma. And so it kind of took off on its own, and then someone's like, well, you should do a local competition for Ninja in your town. So we decided when we get back on Saturday, we're going to be doing this Ninja competition, and all the proceeds are going back to the Epilepsy Foundation. So we really feel like we're helping out with that cause, maybe not as much as some, but we feel like we're at least more involved with it than we have been. And so we just want to say more than anything, thank you so much. I can reiterate, if I can reiterate anything, is that, we moving forward, and it's been probably the best thing for us, and it was just those simple things that kind of serve as reminders that we're pretty lucky, that we found some treatment at the end of 2018, and that, Landon's been almost tonic-clonic free, seizure-free since the end of December. So it's a really good thing for us, and knock on wood, it'll be a year here in a couple months. So. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.
Sorry, our third speaker got held up on a phone call. We just wanted to see, while we're waiting for her to come back, if there's any questions anyone has for Tom or myself specifically, anything you just are curious about, want to know. Yes.
So how are we able to get one of those t-shirts?
So the really cool thing is we came in from Oklahoma, and when we were getting on the plane, we were like, oh, we just got a bunch of shirts because we're going to do this event soon. We wanted to bring a bunch of them out here, but then we realized we were trying to get like PVC on the plane, and it just sounds scary by itself. And so we wanted to bring more out Bonfire, and I can send that link out somehow. Somebody can get with Brad to see if we can do that. But if you want to order one, we'd love it. Like I said, everything that the extra money they do, they kind of put in an account, and then we send it over to the Epilepsy Foundation of Oklahoma. But we can always change that up and bring it maybe over here to this cause too. We were never set on one thing. We just want to find out where it's going to do its best. So, yeah, most definitely appreciate that.
Is there a website for me?
Yeah, it's Bonfire, and I just need to find out. You don't remember, do you?
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. But, that'd be awesome.
Okay, good. And now Tracy is going to speak. Tracy Salzar. It's on here somewhere.
Thank you. So, how do I get it to go through? Oh, just hit the presentation. So, I'm so sorry, but I can do a lot of things, but apparently time zones did me in, and I had somehow double the call with this. So here I am, I made it. I'm Tracy Dixon-Salzar, and I have a daughter who has Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is a very severe form of pediatric onset epilepsy. And I just kind of want to tell you what our journey's been. And sometimes people hear our journey and they're like, oh, that's amazing. Like, it was totally an accident. So if you're sitting in the audience thinking, oh wow, that's like incredible, it really was just tenacity and moving on. Or maybe you'll just think, oh, that's not very incredible at all, and that's fine too. So let's see if I can pull this up. You guys hear me okay? I hear someone chatting at me back there. All right, so come on, you know you want to work. You know you want to work. Oh, here we go. So this 24 years ago was our introduction into the world of epilepsy. This is my 2-year-old daughter, who had been perfectly healthy up until that point, had what we had no idea was a tonic-clonic seizure in the middle of the night. We heard gagging and choking coming from her room. We ran in and we found her like this, and we thought she was choking. Called the paramedics, and they came and they said, her airway is clear, but what you described sounds just like a seizure. And we said, oh, what's a seizure? We had no idea. She had a couple more of these in the middle of the night over the next couple of weeks, and then she went 6 months without having any, and we were watching her like a hawk. And we thought, phew, dodged a bullet there. And of course, she had gone to the hospital and she'd been worked up by a neurologist, and we had done all the things that we were going to do. When she was 3, the seizures came back, and they came back with a vengeance. She started having seizures every day. She was having these tonic-clonics. She started having these myoclonic jerks that would throw her to the ground, usually face first. And she started having these atypical absence seizures where she would stare and twitch. The longest one she ever had lasting 4 days, because doctors didn't think that was a seizure or a seizure cluster. There's 4 other seizure types she had that I'm not even showing you on this video, and that was our introduction. The doctors in the beginning didn't want to call them seizures. They called them events and spells and episodes because they didn't want to label her with epilepsy and seizures. So our first introduction to the stigma of epilepsy was actually by our pediatric epileptologist that we saw. In hindsight, 40,000 seizures or more later that I've counted, because all I could do was count all of those years, so I just counted them. It seems pretty silly to stigmatize it, just call it what it is. Over the next 16 years, from the time she was 3 to the time she was 18, Savannah would seize every day. A good day was 5 to 10 seizures. A bad day was hundreds, too many to count. I just put a greater than sign. She was having 7 different kinds. She was requiring rescue med use all the time to stop seizures that wouldn't stop on their own. We actually remember life before rescue meds even existed, and we were in the emergency room all the time on a first name basis with all of the doctors there. And obviously, you can't have that many seizures and not see delays in development and the evolution of intellectual disability. So by the time Savannah was 5 years old, she was already moderate to severely intellectually disabled from so many seizures. She had been typical up until that point. And she was diagnosed with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome also at age 5, which just means you have a collection of symptoms, more than one type of seizure, pediatric onset, very specific EEG, so slow spike and wave on your EEG, and intellectual disability, which is not required at the time of diagnosis, but is present in nearly everyone with LGS within 5 years of this time that they start having seizures. And back then, the doctor said, you know, epilepsy, okay, she has epilepsy when they finally outed with it before the LGS diagnosis. They said, you know, don't worry about it. She can live a full life, she can live well. She just needs to go on medicine, they'll stop her seizures. She'll probably outgrow it. And don't worry, seizures don't damage the brain, and you can't die from epilepsy. Okay, so this was 20 years ago, so thank God we're evolving, but I still hear stories today where parents have been told this. None of that was true. Every seizure was damaging her brain. Nothing worked. She tried more than 25 different drugs, diets, devices, cockamamie alternative therapies, weird stuff we found because we were so desperate. Because what else do you do when your kid's having that many seizures? Of course you're going to try anything you can. And we resuscitated her a number of times where she almost died. So none of that was true. Here's some numbers for that 16-year odyssey, more than 40,000 seizures. Took her 3 years to finally get the diagnosis of LGS. And let me just say, that's a diagnosis of her symptoms. No one's born with LGS, it's something that develops over time. And when you have slow spike and wave on EEG, it means something has gone horribly wrong in brain development. Your chances of getting seizure freedom after you have that or being intellectually normal, typical, is almost 0. So it took her 3 years to get that. We still didn't know the cause, her etiology, what caused her to have seizures to begin with. We had seen 7 neurologists before we got that diagnosis. She had tried and failed 26 treatments. We didn't know the cause. She had been hospitalized 15 times, had 5 surgeries. We were going broke paying for her monthly drug cost. She was getting diastat use pretty regularly, and the last day of her hospitalization was about $53,000. I said that I would count her seizures, and I did. So here's a graph of that 16 years. You just never knew what you were going to get from day to day. You get a 5 seizure day on Monday, and Tuesday be 500, and Wednesday be 8, and Thursday be 100, and Friday be, God, who knows what Friday was going to be. And so this is a nice representation of just the number of seizures she had across the years. It was a roller coaster, and I don't think I need to tell any of you that because you're living it. This was just from 2006 to 2011, the number of times she would get rescue meds. So by the 2011, at the age of 18, she was getting diastat 2 to 4 times a week to stop her nonstop seizures. And when that didn't work, we went to the emergency room to get intravenous Ativan, which usually worked. And when that didn't work, she'd get put into a medically induced coma and spend the next 2 months in the hospital coming out of that. When I had Savannah, I was 19 years old. She got sick when I was 21. And by about 24 years old, she was diagnosed with LGS. And I had not been to college. I was just a mom staying home. And we felt like we were the only people on the planet with this disease. There was no LGS Foundation. There was no Epilepsy Awareness Day at Disneyland. And nobody really talked about epilepsy. And when they did, they talked about how you could go on and live a great life. So I started reading. I started checking out books at the library that were 10 to 20 years old. I started you had to sign up for internet time back then for an hour at the library, so I'd go check out the internet for an hour. And I learned that we weren't alone. Epilepsy is very common, and that there is a range. There are people that do very well and go on to live full lives, and then there are about a third of patients that don't, that might have never heard of. It's a spectrum disorder. I learned that there were 3 million Americans and 60 million people worldwide that had it. I learned that a lot of the cases, most of the cases begin in childhood, but many of them occur in adulthood as well. 1 in 26 Americans will be impacted by epilepsy. 1 in 10 will experience a seizure in their lifetime. It was really common. So why did I feel so? I learned that most of the patients with epilepsy didn't know the cause of their seizures. And doctors would say, thankfully, we don't need to know the cause of epilepsy in order to treat it. And I thought after, I don't know, maybe by the 7th or 8th medication, I thought, that's insane. You're just treating a symptom and it's not working. What is causing her seizures? And they didn't know. It wasn't birth injury, lack of oxygen at birth. It wasn't an infection. It wasn't a head trauma. The genes that we did know back then, it wasn't that. It wasn't a stroke. It wasn't a cancer. It wasn't a cancer treatment that had led to it. What caused? I had this healthy 2-year-old, and then I didn't. And I learned that it costs an awful lot of money. We are one of the most expensive diseases out there. We get hardly any research funding, and most of the cost, 86% of the cost for epilepsy in the United States is concentrated in our kids, the severe ones, and the adults who don't have seizure control. So why did I feel so alone? Why was there no seizure funding? And I became very angry. And 26 years later, I'm still not over it. I also learned that there were tons of drugs. There's been over 40 medications since 1850 that have been approved for epilepsy. But if you look at the research studies across time, the number of patients who respond to those drugs has not changed. It has remained at a solid 30 to 40% across all of those 100 years, which is ridiculous. And if you look at the number of patients who respond to therapy in this way, where your percentage of responding to the first drug or the second drug or the third drug, in 2000, this group, Quan and Brody, did this study, and 47% of patients became seizure-free on their first medicine, first drug they tried, no matter what that drug was. By the time, and you had 36% that didn't become seizure-free, and it changed depending on the number of patients you had. So if you look, 13% became seizure-free on their second drug. That was in addition to the 47%. By the time you get to the third drug, your chances of responding are less than 1%. When they repeated this study 12 years later, the numbers had not dramatically changed. So we're making new drugs. We're making them towards the symptoms, and we're not really making a dent in any of the vital statistics for our families. They're working, I guess, in the same people that they would have worked for. So I got more angry. And then this one really pissed me off. In 1975, we didn't know the cause of 75% of all epilepsy. And in 2014, we'd gotten that down to about 68%. We hadn't been finding the cause. And so our families just cycled through this treatment where they get a diagnosis of LGS. They might, less than 10%,
actually candidates for surgery that might be curative. And they would just go through this loop of trying medicine after medicine after medicine. Many of them, desperate, go through palliative brain surgery, which to me is just barbaric and shouldn't exist, but it's a lifesaver for so many of our families, where they get a corpus callosotomy to split the two hemispheres of the brain to stop the worst seizure type that they're having. Won't stop all their seizures, so it's palliative, but it'll stop some, but it's brain surgery. This is really what drove me to enroll in college when I was 25. Sorry, it's been 6 months of just crying for me, so I'm being a little weepy. Usually I'm a little more hard-hearted than this, but it's been, yeah, right? I had not been to college, and I just wanted two things. I wanted to understand what could cause epilepsy, because doctors didn't seem to be able to explain it to me in a way I understood. And I wanted to get inside the mind of a pediatric neurologist, because I didn't understand. Like, they said, "Do you have questions, Tracy?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, what are they?" I have no idea what they are. I know I have questions and I should be asking them. And so when I enrolled in college, I thought I was the stupidest person on the planet, because I was checking out internet time and reading papers, and I couldn't understand what I was reading. So I enrolled in English classes because I thought my English was really shabby. And a couple English classes and a couple A+s later, I realized that maybe I should take some science classes, because medical papers are not in English. They're in science and medicine. And I fell in love with science in my very first class. My very first class, I learned genetics, and I thought, this could explain that switch, healthy 2-year-old not. I was just always really attracted to it. And really, my only goal was, initially, was just to learn and understand, kind of understand where doctors were coming from, learn the language, a totally new language, medicine, and yet another language, scientists. Because medical doctors and scientists, they don't know how to talk to each other either. And so I spent 7 years at the junior college remediating, because I hadn't done very well in high school, and then another 4 years getting my bachelor's, and I got my master's, and I got my PhD. And some point in there, I wanted to be a part of the group of people looking for causes of epilepsy. When I initially got into this, all I ever heard was, I don't know what caused it, I don't know why she's not responding to meds. So I thought, no one in the world is studying this. There's just nobody. It's gonna be me and no one else. The good news is there were hundreds of thousands of people all around the world studying. It's just a really hard problem. And I just wanted to be a part of the team of people helping to fix it, to leave it better than we found it, because I was really pissed, and it was either that or, go get depressed and throw myself off the nearest bridge. So threw myself into science. And when I had done my PhD and I started doing my postdoc after that, the genetic explosion in epilepsy happened. And I was a teeny tiny part of that. I found genes that cause epilepsy. I helped try to understand how those genes led to the seizures in humans. I created mouse models and stem cell models, and I published papers, and I was being a successful scientist. And meanwhile, my kid was having seizures every day and going into status every day. So the doctor that I worked for at the time came in and said, "Hey, well, we should sequence her, because she's not doing well." And so we did. And we found absolutely nothing when we sequenced her DNA. We did an exome sequencing on her, and this was my job in the lab, to actually bring this technology to the lab. But over the next 6 to 8 months, I continued to do the analysis, and I did something called crazy mother analysis, where I did something that's now called genomic signature. It's still not done in epilepsy. It's done a lot in cancer, and it's called pathway grouping. And I found a series of mutations in Savannah that were in her calcium signaling pathway. I think many of you probably are familiar with the neuron. Oh, look, I turned it off. So this is a neuron, and it releases a signal to the next neuron in electrical signaling chemical. And calcium channels over here are very important in that. They let calcium into the cell, and it starts the signal. They do many other things. And the mutations she had are represented vaguely here by these red dots. She had a lot of them. She has a lot of mutations, more than most of us are walking around with. Here's a list of some of them, and many of these mutations were in a gene called an L-type calcium channel gene. And there are drugs on the market that are not used in epilepsy that actually target L-type calcium channel genes. And I remembered when I saw this data that anytime Savannah ate calcium supplements or had milk or had yogurt, she always had more seizures. So she was on a calcium-restricted diet, and I thought there's something to this. So I painted a bunch of analysis to try to understand if maybe putting her on one of these drugs would be beneficial or not. And to make a very long story short, and another 1.5 years work of course short, we did end up trying her with her doctor based on the data on one of these drugs. It's called Rapamil. It's used for high blood pressure and arrhythmias. And I went to her doctor and said, hey, I think we should put her on this. And we went over it and he said, sure. And it worked. Within 2 weeks of going on Rapamil, Savannah had a 95% reduction in her seizures. She was having about 75 a week. And that went down to about 2 or 3 a week. And even more importantly and more life-changing is that within 2 weeks, the amount of times that she was going into nonstop seizures and receiving rescue medicines stopped. She had a couple of blips in there and then it completely stopped. And that was 8 years ago. And Savannah continues to do really well. Damn it, I hate crying. Like I said, it's been an emotional couple of months for us, so usually I'm a hard-hearted woman, but not today, and that's fine. Savannah was on 7 drugs. She's now on 4. She was having, like I said, approximately 75 seizures a week every day. She now seizes 2 to 3 times a week, about 2 to 3 seizures a week, all at night, which doesn't reduce her risk of SUDEP, but it does make her safer and out of the helmet. She is walking, she is talking, she is here somewhere at this meeting with her dad and her service dog, bossing everyone around. She is sassy, she has a really sassy and funny personality, and on a weekly basis I get a "Dumb Mom, use your brain" from her. She's obsessed with boys. 7-year-old, 70-year-old, she thinks they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And has discovered 11-year-old YouTube sensations and can navigate her iPhone to them and just sit there and swoon over these lip-syncing 11-year-old boys. It's adorable. I have a little video here of her on my last slide, kissing her dog. It tickles. She's yelling at her dad and laughing about it. High-fiving her mom. This kid would sleep 17 to 18 hours a day before this drug. She was seizing all the time. She could not get her words out from word retrieval. And she is living her very best life now. It is not perfect. She is moderate to severe intellectually disabled. She struggles. She can feed herself, but she just won't eat. So we feed her a lot of times. We help her to the bathroom. She's very ataxic from long-term drug use that has destroyed her brain and made her stagger like a drunk. But we just never thought we'd get out of epilepsy prison. And we know we've just been paroled, like we've got the ankle bracelet and we could go back at any moment, but we're gonna just enjoy every moment of this. And I think the most surprising thing for me is if you had said drug number 27 was gonna be the difference for her, and that she was gonna start gaining skills again, learning to buckle her seatbelt, learning to put a key in the door, learning to yell at dad, you know, learning Ziploc bags. She takes every small thing. She got all her Halloween candy, 1 piece per Ziploc. And so if you need a Ziploc for lunch, nope, forget it. They're being used. She won't eat the candy. She doesn't really like candy, but she'll put it in a Ziploc. If you had told me that would be drug number 27, I would have just sort of laughed at you. But you know, you can't give up as parents. You always have that 1% hope that the next thing's gonna work. And I just want to end on this, is that we now think, you know, in 2019, that the majority of the remaining epilepsies, even though we haven't solved them all, are genetic. About 50% of the pediatric severe epilepsies like my kid has are actually a single gene driving the disease. And we're beginning to look at the others that we think it's multiple genes working together, and we're starting to figure it out. And so with that, I just want to say, as patients, as parents, keep fighting for your kids. I'm tired of the day where all of the dogs sitting around the table are making decisions for us cats. If you guys can't read this, it says, meanwhile, at today's Feline Engagement Committee, decisions were made on how to increase feline recruitment. And it's all dogs. And I love our doctors, and I love our researchers, right? I love all the people that are here to help us because, God, I cannot do this alone. I mean, I even have a little bit of love in my heart for government and the FDA and SSI that help, even though they mostly make me crazy. But I want to say, and my money is on us as patients, rising up as advocates, fighting for our kids, whether it's individually, just getting what your kid needs, which is perfectly reasonable, or it's at a larger advocacy level, trying to talk to the FDA or trying to talk to doctors to change the way hospitals work. It really doesn't matter, but we as patients and caregivers should have a say, and that is the only way that we're going to get meaningful treatments, because the 100 years prior, when it was just in their hands, we didn't get it. And so we want to help. We want to be a part of the solution. We're all in this together. Like, as much as I want to rage against doctors or rage against the system and the machine, system's broken, don't get me wrong. I will rant on the system all day, but it's not the people. The people in the system are part of a broken system. They do want to help, but they don't know how to fix it. So let's get in there and help them clean it up. And that's it. Thank you. So we went a little over. We got to get out for the next crowd, but we'll be in the back, the three of us, if you have any questions. I thought you were just waving at me. I didn't realize you were like, get off. Like, I'm like, oh, hi. Hi, how are you? It's right there. I got it. I just need to check. Okay.
No, but you too.
I'm okay right now, thank you.
Everything I've seen.
Kathy, do you have those? She's looking for another mic.
Hey.
It says water on it.
Oh, does he want to? Oh, perfect. I was trying to make sure it got back up here because one of the other ones walked out.
I know, I was hearing her in the bathroom.
Oh, no, yeah, it's up there. Yeah, I was just.
Yeah. Sure. Is there another? Great question.
I told my I go chip bring the truck for all the talks with Ken.
like the crazy private planes or